there's always room for us, whether we're the presenters or the leaders or the receivers. There's always room for more sensitivity to the Spirit. We all can have more room for that. There's always room for more generosity, and there's always room for more authenticity. And those are all three characteristics that bring success, no matter what you're fundraising for or whatever point you're trying to get the people you're leading to. That will get them there.
Welcome to It's Not About the Money, a podcast in search of grounded fundraising. I'm Heather, and together with my co-host Andy, we look beyond the quick tips and formulas. Join us as we explore the nuance and complexity of ministry fundraising. If you want to thrive in partner development, not just survive it, this is the place for you.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Those who are fundraising operate in a tricky tension, and we've talked about this before. On the one hand, we need to do our part well, show up prepared, be bold and vulnerable, and speak with conviction and clarity. On the other hand, God's provision doesn't come down to our performance. It isn't on us to make something happen, but it can feel like it is. Our guest today holds a similar tension. He also works in a position that can either be driven by a felt need to perform or from a secure place of being a catalyst or a conduit or a medium for God to show up. He has had to wrestle with the tension of leading worship when he doesn't feel like it and staying grounded in the reality that it isn't about him, though ultimately giving everything he has really does matter. Heather, would you like to introduce our guest?
I would love to introduce our guest. Today, we are so pleased to be joined by Travis Cottrell. And just to give you guys a bit of info on Travis, so he has spent the last 30 years answering the call of God in a variety of ways as an artist, a songwriter, a worship leader, an author, and an arranger. And from the local church to all around the world, he has put many good and beautiful things into the world and has graciously agreed to join us today. You guys can read more specifics about Travis on his website, but right now we have him here with us. Travis, we would love to hear about what brought you to this point in your life.
Hey, you guys. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
It's good to see y'all today. Well, gosh, how long do we have? That's a big, that was so wide open, that question. What brought me to this point in my life?
Yeah. Take it as you want to.
Well, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and I've been in Tennessee ever since I finished college. I grew up in Boone, North Carolina, the mountains of North Carolina, one of the most beautiful places on earth. And I went 2 years to college there at Appalachian State, and then transferred to Belmont in Nashville and finished there, and have been in Tennessee ever since. When you ask a question like, how are you where you are right now? I feel like in so many ways, I have been doing the same thing with my calling and my life ever since I got out of college. Like the rooms have changed a little bit. The crowds have changed a little bit. Sometimes my daily tasks change. But if you strip it all down, I've been doing the same thing this whole time. And I mean that in a positive way. I don't mean like, gosh, I'm bored. I've been doing the same thing. I feel like God made me to be an equipper and to create resources, to kind of have an eye and a mind and a heart to see where there is a need for a resource and then find a way to meet that need. And so that's what I've been doing. I mean, I graduated from Belmont and I started working at a church in Nashville. One thing led to another. Just 6 years out of college, I was traveling with Beth Moore. We began that ministry of Living Proof live in 1998, and we're still going. This is our, we just celebrated our 25th year last year. Wow. So, and we are beginning our new season together right now. So, and then, just been busy working in church, leading people in worship, gathering musicians and singers and lay people who want to serve, whether it was my full-time job or it was just, if I was just volunteering, whatever, just been doing that. all these times. I'm very much, I don't want to dive too deeply into where we're headed too soon, but I am a very reluctant artist. I've been, I've made lots of records, and a lot of people know that side of me, and I love that, but I'm a very reluctant artist. I don't think like an artist. I think like a pastor, and I think like a resource maker. So when I don't default to, here's my art, take it or leave it. Here's my music, take it or leave it. I default to, what do you need? And how can I serve your church, or how can I serve your ministry with a piece of music or an arrangement or a song or my presence to come and, encourage you. So it's been an interesting ride. I have been writing this tension of artist and worship leader because they're not synonymous.
Interesting.
And so I've been just writing that for 30 years. And that's what I was doing right out of college, and I'm still doing it now.
I really, really appreciate everything you said. And I don't want to go too far on a rabbit hole, but I do want to ask you, because there was a song you sang at a recent event I went to, So Will I, or The Stars. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about. It's a song called Creation Sings, and I will praise you. Oh, and it was more performative, right?
Yeah. But it's beautiful. And you wrote that song, correct?
I did. And I do kind of go down those roads of more artistic expressions, but when it comes to playing them out in real life ministry, I weave those into moments that they don't begin there and they don't end there. So I weave those moments of worship, hopefully, where it's still taking a worshiper on the journey.
Yes.
And we sing together to get there, and then we sing out of it. And so, I do have that side, and I'm always kind of balancing it. But at the end of the day, my favorite room to be in is one where, we're worshiping and I can just get out of the way. And my voice is one of many, not just one of one.
Yeah.
All right. So, Travis, could you share with us any experiences you've had in fundraising, whether for yourself, on behalf of others, or even as somebody who's been invited into partnership?
Yes. And again, I as kind of a branch of who God has had me to be in the space of someone that's kind of on a platform and has some level of a voice in some people's lives, and trying to manage that, and taking all of that God has given to me in terms of a platform, but all the while feeling reluctant to accept it. I'll never forget when I never thought of myself, like from the very beginning when I started with Beth. She won't talk about any of her own resources on stage. And I always appreciated that about her, that she would never talk about her resources. She never wanted to sell anything from the platform. That was a time for worship and the word. And I really found comfort in that. And I adopted that as kind of my own way. And I don't judge anyone who does that. Like I'm not making any kind of statement of what's right or wrong. I'm just saying what I learned from her, what she was comfortable with, was also what I was comfortable with, and that that kind of sacred space is reserved for worship and the word. And so we just don't really sell things. So when it came time to represent other things that we believed in, that were causes that were way bigger than us, we really had to reevaluate, how do we make that work? And I'll never forget in 2008, Compassion International is a relief organization that had approached me numerous times about representing them when I am on a platform or have some manner of voice. And I was so reluctant, and I kept saying no, and I kept saying no. It is not a natural place for me to get up and go, you all need that. You need this. You need this in your life. Not just they need you in their lives. You need this in your life. I couldn't find that voice in me. And they said, well, go on a trip with us, which is what they do. And my wife and I already we sponsored Compassion Kids, and we had a history of sponsoring them, and loved the ministry, everything that we knew it to be, and our limited information just as a participant. So we go on a trip, we go to Haiti, and I end up being able to meet one of our Compassion children.
Oh, wow.
Which was mind blowing. And the game changed in that moment of understanding, some things are just worth you busting out of your own comfort zone. And the idea that the Lord isn't necessarily worried about, it's not a priority for him for us to be comfortable. And so then the assignment came to me of how to live in that tension of what is the best way to make my voice highly effective and still and make it work. And so it was Compassion International that really put that in my ballpark by inviting me in, by giving me the experience and helping me see with my own eyes what I was representing. And that really was important to me. So then I can go with people who trust me, and especially in the area of worship, if they trust me to lead them in worship through song and experience, then I need to be trustworthy to lead them in other areas of worship that weren't necessarily musical.
Sure.
And I believe giving to be one of those.
Yes, amen.
So it was just working through that and then finding, how do you turn your voice into something that can take people down that journey, and where people have to believe you for them to follow you. And so that's where it all began with me back in 2007, 2008 with Compassion International.
Nice.
Very cool. Man, a couple of really powerful things you said. I mean, obviously just calling out that generosity, giving, partnership can be a form of worship. Yeah. Right? And then also that God isn't interested in our comfort. Sometimes we're called to uncomfortable things for the good of others, to invite them into something that's for their good or for his glory. That was good.
Yeah, and a really practical thing that stood out to me was that things change when donors are able to meet the people that they're impacting.
Yeah.
So that shifted everything for you. And I think for someone maybe on this side who doesn't, if you're writing a support letter or you're doing something where you don't have the ability to introduce your donors to the people that you are ministering to, how important it is to communicate that impact and how to show that in a really tangible way. Yeah.
I think generally speaking, people follow who they trust, and people trust people who are authentic through vulnerability. I think, artists so many times can fake an authenticity, but it's really through our vulnerability that people can really, really come to trust you, you and understand. I remember those early days of talking about Compassion, just expressing, you guys, I didn't want to do this because I feel uncomfortable talking about money. I feel uncomfortable that's not a place that I come from, and putting that before people. It's just not something I've done.
Sure.
But I got to tell you, I went and experienced this with my own eyes, and I smelled the smells and I saw the sights, and I looked in the eyes of a mom whose child I was sponsoring, who spoke in broken Creole English. She barely knew any words. And all she could say was thank you. And she never smiled, and she never looked anything but exhausted because she had 9 children and a blind husband who couldn't work. And so I was, when I'm able to say that and then say to them, the only thing I could think to say back to her was, no, thank you. No, thank you. And she would never know what I meant by that. Sure. But what I really meant by that is, as I'm trying to raise, and I had 3 young children at the time, and my experience that I was sharing, from the platform back then was, I was thanking her from saving us from just our own selves and our own greediness and our own self-focus, whether it's on those very first dollar aisles that hit you at Target, or whatever it is that where we are wasting away things, when the smallest amount of the smallest amount of giving can change somebody's life forever. So,
Yeah.
it's just, I finally had to overcome my fear of speaking about money and giving, and be really vulnerable about why that's a struggle, but that I found something that was worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And when we find something that's worth it, we're willing to talk about it. And then our vulnerability will lead people to that same place, I believe.
Mm.
Okay, so I have a question. Let's dig a little bit deeper, and maybe the answer is similar, but personal fundraising and leading other people in worship, that could feel different, especially from the outside looking in, and maybe they are. But we believe maybe there's a common posture required by both. So one that is humble and obedient and accepts. Do those words resonate when you think about the work that you do?
Absolutely. And you started talking, and I immediately thought about Romans 12:1 and 2, really, that says, I urge you, therefore, by the mercies of God, to present yourself as living sacrifices,
Yeah, right.
holy and acceptable to God. This is your spiritual service of worship. So to live a sacrificial life means that we're going to live a giving life, right?
Yeah.
And so that's part of our worship. It's right there in Romans, And then verse 2 goes on and says, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, which means if we're transformed to not see the world in our lives like the world tells us, then that means we have no option but to see the need around us. It's not optional. That if we're going to be transformed by the renewing of our minds, then that means we have to step into a sacrificial giving life. And that's our spiritual service of worship, as Paul says.
So, Travis, can you tell me about a time in your ministry when your role felt more like performance and less like creating space for God to show up? And does it ever feel connected to the size of congregation or audience? Like, do you ever get in your head and it feel harder to just be present and let the Lord do his thing if it's like a larger audience or smaller? Or how does that work for you?
I think I could go straight to, again, talking about with a fundraising angle, because I do have an experience there. I began to create this unhealthy, incorrect mindset that preparedness and sharing my message was equated to inauthenticity. I'm a shoot from the hip guy. For instance, on a Sunday morning at my church, when I'm responsible for, I often call myself the minister of announcements, because I'm the guy that has to hit all the things. The transition to the giving moment, the transition to the prayer moment. I've got to say this and this and this as we talk about messaging and all that kind of stuff. And I'll have an idea of the essence of the day, but I don't memorize a script.
Sure.
So because I feel like sometimes that translates more authentically to my people. And so, it's a little bit shoot from the hip, but I have also had a tendency to take that to too far of a level in terms of when I am representing an agency, an organization, or something from a platform. I operate only on emotion.
Okay.
And I can get really emotional about whether it's kids or a missions organization, an outreach group that, I have a tendency to pull my emotions way up here and speak out of that when I really am not allowing myself the gift of preparedness, understanding that preparedness doesn't mean performance. And preparedness doesn't mean that they're going to read us as inauthentic. And
great.
So finding that balance of how God has gifted me and, to be able to kind of speak off the cuff or give a natural vibe or whatever it is, but also be ready with the facts. And there have been times where I have worked with organizations before, and we have been deep into relationship, and they'll come and they'll be there when I give my word about the organization, and they'll pull me off the platform and go, no, that was really good, and you did this and this and this. Now here's what we need you to do. And I had to be willing to be humble and go, oh, I have room to grow there. I can't just operate on this level of emotion and just what I would, if I thought like I was anointed for the moment. But I have to be willing to be prepared and share what needs to be shared in succinct and relatable ways, and move through that with my emotion and with my gifting, but not to leave that aside. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Those have been hard moments for me, where inviting the gift of rehearsal and inviting the gift of learning into my area, which has been largely dominated by natural gifting.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. So you don't feel like you're walking onto a stage with a burden to make something happen. But what you're saying is you do think that in some cases you feel like it would better serve you to be more concrete in your preparation as opposed to more like on the
Free
fly
form.
or free form.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Especially when I'm asking something that's as tangible as a donation or a sponsorship, or when that is tied to it, I feel like, I need to go way deeper in preparedness than I would even for the main part of my night, which would be leading worship. I don't ever get nervous. I don't get nervous like leading worship. And I don't think of it as, well, we have 3,000 people at church this morning, as opposed to we have 50 people. But I do, when the element of asking for a donation or sponsorship or whatever, when that gets into play, I have had to learn that being prepared and speaking forthrightly with facts along with my feelings is going to, in the long run, be way more highly effective than just me trying to land it all on charisma.
Yeah.
Yeah, or just like authenticity. I can tell that authenticity and that vulnerability are high values for you. And I actually think those are really high values for many in our culture these days, especially around, can I trust what you're saying? Can I trust what you're asking of me? So I think that those are really, really key attributes to have. Yeah.
Well, and I think the key that carries over, and tell me if you agree with me, Heather, but preparedness does not equal performance.
Right.
And I feel like we preach a lot, like, don't come overly like engage in a formula and like trusting in your presentation to do it, but just engage authentically. But there's a balance there where you do have to be prepared. You can't go completely off the cuff. You have to know information about the people that you're going to serve.
Yeah. Well, and, I think that Travis called it out well when he said that when he's preparing, for his local fellowship for these different periods where his voice leading people into kind of the next thing, that he comes kind of with the essence of what he wants to say, but without a script. And I think that's actually such an excellent example of what we would hope people could do in their fundraising. I mean, of course, towards the beginning, they're probably going to need a little bit more preparation as they're getting started. But just like you, in the context of your home church, doing these things that you do routinely, I think that still having that kind of baseline of knowing where you're going with something, but not needing a script is helpful.
Yeah, you just have to be prepared. Like, do some research ahead of time. Go to the Joshua Project, or go to, find some stats to support the story and the heart and the emotion behind it. I think you need both of those things.
And I think I agree with both of you there. And there was something you said a minute ago, Andy, that made me realize that probably the experience or even the tension falls on the opposite side of the coin for a lot of people, in that I've been on a platform my whole life. So, I was in plays and musicals from the time I was, 3, 4, 5. And so being in front of people speaking about something is natural to me. But other people who are put in a position where God calls them to raise money, that's not their gifting. And so exactly what you just said a minute ago, Andy, that they come over prepared. And it's on the other side of, rather than super off the cuff and emotional and not a lot of facts or, good information, is the other side of being rigid and over prepared and memorized, when in actuality, the joy is right in the middle, because neither side is gonna really work as well as right in the middle, where we are just authentic, not slick. Slick always, I just don't think slick works.
No.
I don't think super shiny, polished, and perfect. Ultimately, I think a flag goes off or something.
Right.
I think when we are just not slick, but transparent, authentic, and real, no matter which side we're coming from on that, we have our facts and we have our experience, and we put them together and share it authentically. I think that's the best place to land.
That's good.
Knowing that many of the spaces that you have the privilege of stepping into, whether it be a Living Proof conference or some type of concert event or some, even the local church setting, I feel like sometimes other people can have like expectations of what that time is going to look like, or the results that it might have. I mean, there can just be a lot of expectations. How do you kind of stay grounded in what your part in that is and what God's part in that is, in terms of whatever he would produce?
Right. I think I do have struggles with that. I think we all do. As I get older, I feel like my perspective has changed. There's something about it that as I get older, it's like I'm not right here in my life. This is going to sound weird, and I've never said this out loud. I'm like processing.
This is
in
a safe
front
place.
of a microphone, which is scary. But it's almost like I start rising above my life and seeing a bigger picture, and that I just don't worry about it. If I get into, I'm just not down in the moments. Not experientially, I am experiencing life, but I just see a bigger, longer curve and a bigger picture. Where if someone has this expectation of me that I feel is unfair or even off base, it doesn't bother me like I used to. I was such a pleaser, and I still am to a certain degree, but that wrestling of being a pleaser and going after that one person, just like to make that person, well, that person thinks we do this too much, or that person not enough, and this person, I got a call just this morning from a very influential man in my life. And he was calling to encourage me. But in his encouragement, he was saying, "You're doing this. And we really love you doing this." And they're here for that. And, I had to like really kind of, God, what do you want me to receive from this? What is beneficial for what I'm producing? What is just beneficial for my own humility? Because God may not have anything for you to respond to tangibly from a word of criticism or even a word of constructive criticism, but maybe his only point in us hearing it is to humble us. And even if the person was completely wrong, completely off base, maybe even ungodly. My friend wasn't ungodly, but if someone brings a word to you in your people-pleasing ways that's way off base, well, did it humble me? Yeah, it probably did. So that means the Lord used it, and he allowed it. But anyway, my friend, I had to really kind of like I am right now in real time, like process what he was saying, and how do I humbly receive this as a compliment, but also as something he's trying to direct me a different way. And so I do, like at 54 years old, I'm still at that place of going, okay, Lord, what is the lesson for me here? And then what is my response? And so I'll always, especially in worship where everybody and their mama has an opinion, right?
Yes.
So you really just have to just completely die to that and do your best to be in tune with the voice of the Lord and where he's calling you to lead.
So this is a related question, and we've talked about this previously on the podcast a number of times. This tension that exists in ministry when we are trying to do our part, but we're also trying to leave room for the Lord to do what he wants to do, kind of getting out of our own ways. I'm wondering if that happens to you, and like, what are your first clues if you sense that you are becoming a little too self-dependent or self-reliant on making things come together? If this happens, is it something that you feel physically, like maybe a tightness in the chest or a tension in the neck or something, or is it like some kind of second guessing or negativity or discouragement or something else?
That's a good question. I think the first thing that comes to my mind when you ask that, Andy, is the first thing I notice in myself is that I've stopped thinking about people.
Okay.
If I am able to summon up enough self-awareness to go, am I edgy? Am I on edge? Am I still people motivated?
Mm.
And that's happened to me recently, where I just found, maybe it was a physical feeling or something, but I just found that I was just like edgy and kind of barky, barking. And I just realized that I had just kind of drifted away from the humility in the moment by moments.
Mm.
And I think a lot of times, we get so focused on our work for the Lord, our work for the Lord, our work for the Lord. This is for the Lord. Well, it's for his people. My calling is for his people. And if his people can't worship with what I put on their plate, then I'm missing the call. Yes, my worship is for the Lord, but on Sunday morning, my worship is for people. It's to help people connect. So I have to be so filled up in my own personal worship that, yes, they need to see me worshiping, and yes, we have to worship together, but that moment is for them. And so the decisions that I make have to be people motivated. And so sometimes I do feel like when I drift away from that, I feel like kind of this crankiness and this weirdness that I really do have to reset and remind myself that my calling is people driven.
I think that crosses over nicely to people that are fundraising or just in ministry, like also motivated by people.
Well, yeah. And if you think about it, like definitely two sets, right? Or actually multiple sets, but definitely motivated by the people that they like have vision for ministry to, in whatever context they're moving towards ministry in. But then also very much the people that they're sitting down with and inviting into partnership. Because like Travis was saying earlier, the thing he kept thinking when he was talking to that mom was, no, thank you. Like, thank you for kind of saving my perspective from like, $20 on the Target dollar bin when this could like feed your child for, I don't know, a month, several months or something. And so I think I really love this emphasis that you've identified, Travis, on like the Lord's, like working for the Lord's people and like what it is, his purposes for his people and equipping them. And so I guess along with that, I'm wondering if you have any proactive habits or rhythms that kind of like help you keep that perspective, like maybe looking at the crowd and praying intentionally before you step on stage, or even as you're preparing for an event or as you're songwriting. Like, are there things that kind of ground you in thinking about the people that you're ministering to?
I try to lead. So as an example, my church has a choir. And
cool.
we
Love it.
I know. I say that like it's an anomaly because it kind of is.
Yeah.
It is, yes.
And we don't sing every Sunday. We sing a couple of times a month, but I have about 200 in our choir.
Wow.
And coming here, in any choir that I've led in the past, I'm kind of like a choir guy and I love choir, but I don't believe in a choir in a worship setting to have a performative mindset.
Yeah.
I try to reframe and recalibrate everybody's paradigm to be that of a worship leading choir. And part of that, to answer your question, is one thing I tell my choir to do, and I do this myself: consider my role as a worship leader as that of an intercessory role. And so what I mean by that is every Sunday, I'm aware that I have a seat where I can see every face in the room. And the choir has a seat where they can see every face in the room. And God has the ability to give us the ability to see in the Spirit. And I ask God, and I ask our choir every Sunday morning to look at that crowd and look for faces and ask God who to pray for. And so when they're up there, their first goal is not to sing perfectly. Their first goal is to be that of an intercessory choir. So we keep the mindset of all the time going, who would you have me pray for? I'm going to pray for that guy while we sing right there. I know his name. His name is Steve. His wife is such and such. And I don't even know what he needs today, but I'm going to pray for him. And so, that may sound a little weird, but I believe God has that ability to call us to pray for things that we see, and can even give us an idea of how to direct our prayers. And that's how I'm trying to train my choir to approach their call. That keeps it fresh every Sunday. That keeps the pressure off it being performative. And that keeps them coming back for more, I honestly think, because I do believe people are looking for things that matter, and they're looking to be a part of things that matter rather than just feeding our own ego by being a great choir.
Sure. Nice.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think that there's just such power in that awareness to what's happening around you and that willingness to kind of like lean into prayer. That strikes me because this past Sunday after church, we were wrangling our crew. I mentioned 4 boys. It's a lot of wrangling anywhere.
A lot of wrangling.
Yeah, but we were like wrangling our crew to the minivan because, yes, we have that. And I noticed a gal that had just had a baby. And as I was like kind of rejoicing internally, like, oh, wow, she had her baby, there was a woman right behind her that was just weeping. And I wasn't in a position to go over to the woman, but I just felt the Spirit saying, pray for her, And so it was just an invitation in that moment that I think, like you said, the Spirit shows up and gives us, even though we don't know people, we don't know what's going on, but it's just an invitation to see and respond.
And could the Lord, in your donor onboarding process, be encouraging you to pray for these people in new ways and fresh ways?
Oh, absolutely.
And giving you insight into their lives that you didn't have before.
Yeah. Well, and okay, so I kind of want to go back a little bit to something Travis said before about comments people make, and what if that's only to make you humble? I thought about a recent episode we did on when people aren't supportive, and we talked with some workers that their family just said some really hard things to them when they were mobilizing into their ministry, some really, really negative things. And it's just, I thought I did want to call out, it's hard to know what to do with those comments, but I think what you said, Travis, is such an invitation. Can I just receive this as a reminder from the Lord to let me be humbled, even if these things aren't true? What could the Lord have for my own formation or good in that? And then also with that, just the mindfulness to pray for those people, to see and to have a mind bent towards prayer. So kind of connecting all those ideas. But
good.
Yeah, that's really good. But what an awareness and a gift these people, just immeasurable what they would bring to those lives if they would come in partnership with it. And so it's just a matter of helping people's eyes be open to that the gift of partnering is so great for the giver. And that's a biblical concept. It's a simple biblical concept. It's so simple. We teach our kids that from, their earliest days, it's better to give than to receive. But it really, really is true. That was something I was thinking when I was, that sweet mom in Haiti. She could have never, ever, ever understood that. Even if I spoke her language in the best possible way, I don't think she could have ever, because her paradigm of life was so completely different than mine. Her experiences and her
context,
privilege or lack thereof. Yeah, her context. And so being able to use sensitivity and generosity and authenticity to meet people in that moment of, can I humbly say, you need this in your life, has been real effective for me.
So let's just give some space to keep it, again, wide open. Some of the things that you've learned since you've been in this role: generosity, authenticity,
sensitivity to
the Spirit. Anything else that you feel like the Lord has taught you over the 30-some years?
Yeah, a lot. I say this to my kids. My kids are 26, 23, 20. Something that I loved my parents. They were great Christian parents, and I had this simple upbringing in rural North Carolina. I wouldn't trade it for anything. But my parents were old. They were older when I was born. They were 45 and 40, and they had an 18-year-old when I was 18 and a 14 and 12-year-old when I was born. So, by the time I was 10 years old, I had just armfuls of nieces and nephews because my siblings were so much older. Yeah. So in a lot of ways, I was raised by grandparents. My parents were in grandparent mode, and it was fine. It's not a complaint. I love it. But I will say that I was raised in that generation where the only thing I ever saw growing up was, well, whenever you get to your adulthood, whether it's right out of high school or right out of college, you decide what is your thing and you do it till you die. And obviously we live in such a different world. No one would really ever think that, but I try to express to my kids, and something that the Lord has taught me. And even at the age of 50 years old, I'm just reminding myself that we are not stepping in concrete with what we're doing, with our calling, with our money, with anything. Now, our marriages that's a lifelong covenant. And when we have children, it's a lifelong partnership. And of course, our calling with the Lord is lifelong. But where we live, always on the table. How we spend our money, always on the table. Where we fellowship and community and church, it's always on the table. Those things are on the table. And just to be willing to hear the Lord, and if he asks you to change, if you have that understanding, be ready, even if it's how you spend your money, how you invest your money, how much you think you need in your life. But how could you try to outgive God? Always have everything on the table and be really light-footed with your life so that when he calls you to do something that's drastic, dramatic in fashion, or completely extravagant in giving, that you're ready to do it because you haven't bought into the idea that you're standing in concrete. Because aside from your family and your relationship with Jesus, you never are, ever. And that's just something that's like, hold your life loosely. Hold your life loosely before the Lord.
So be careful with the anchors you put down.
Right.
Yeah, I really love the way you articulated that. And I know you've written some books. I'm curious if that is something you've written to at this point.
The only book I wrote was more than a decade ago. And I do remember that I wrote it in the middle of a transition in my life where God called us out of Nashville to move to another town 2 hours away. He called me to work at a church, and I never wanted to work at a church. And, I never saw myself as a church pastor. I had pastoral skills, and I was using those in ministry, but I just never thought I was going to stare at the same group of people every Sunday morning. I just never thought it. Now I love it so much.
Yeah.
But back then when I was writing that book, I was in the middle of that calling, and it was a lot of wrestling. My wife and I just wrestling with God, figuring it out because we had bought our forever house. We had our 3 kids. I'd had my most successful career to date with a record that I just released. And here God was calling us to leave Nashville. And I came to this chapter that I ended up writing that just said, there's always something next with God. There's always something next. And so I don't know the theology on if he really cares about what we want. I know that he knows what's best, and he knows what will bring Jesus glory. And sometimes we don't know that. We just have to trust him. And so holding our lives loosely is something that as I get older and I walk with my kids through the difficulty of being young adults in this generation, it's on the forefront of my mind. Just hold it loosely. Hold it loosely.
Yeah. Even in things where you kind of want there to be concrete around your feet, right? Like you said, you built your forever home. I know that is something a lot of people feel like, oh, I've created this space. I've designed this space.
Finally.
I kind of want concrete around my feet here.
Yeah. And God can use it. Like,
totally.
God, you could use me right here.
Yeah. Yeah, but man, I loved the way you articulated that be light-footed with your life. I think that's going to really stick with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know that we're drawing near to the end of our time, and I just definitely want to respect your time. By way of encouragement, what else would you want to say to our listeners as they persevere in support-based ministry?
Well, I would just encourage people to remember their first love of Jesus and what were those markers that got you to where you are now, and speak out of that, the passion for those things. And don't worry about being slick, and don't worry about being impressive, nobody cares anymore. I think, one of the benefits of this generation is that they know baloney when they see it.
Yeah.
And we've had a lot of baloney in the church, right? And so I just would encourage everybody that, go back to your first love and the passion that got you there. And you have everything you need in Christ to do what you're called to do. You have it all within you in Christ. In Christ, you have everything you need. And there may be mountains of bills or expectations that are in front of you, but you have everything you need to get to where you're going in Christ. And just be mindful of that first love that got you there and speak to those passions. And every step will be there before you. I was a kid when Amy Grant wrote the song, "Thy Word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path." And that's right out of Psalm 119. And I love how that psalm reads, that he's a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. But it doesn't say he lights up the entire journey in front of us.
Right.
But there's a lamp on our feet. And so that means we can take the next step. And then when we have that next step, then there's a lamp to our feet and we can see the next step. And so just trust that lamp, even if it's just one step at a time, and he will not fail you.
Yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah, that is.
Thanks, Travis. That was fantastic. I think the thing that stood out to me the most was fundraiser, missionary. Ask yourself the question, are you helping your donor to worship? And what does that look like? Communicating the right stories, being intentional, not getting mired in, even as good as your own ministry is, not getting stuck in that and neglecting them. So thank you, Travis. Our final question is, suddenly you have $10,000 and you have to give it away today. Who or what would you give it to?
If I had $10,000 to give away today, I would probably give it to People Loving Nashville. That's an organization that I believe to be so authentically helping their neighbors here in my hometown. I've been so over-churched my whole life that I've had this mindset of missions around the world, which I do appreciate and I love.
Yes.
But I've really tried to be in tune to needs around me. I have a lot of friends that are highly involved with People Loving Nashville. That'd probably be one of the places I would look to invest.
Very cool.
Awesome.
So the organization is called People Loving Nashville?
Yes.
Cool. I like it.
Yeah.
Well, like Andy said, thank you so much for your time. This was a real honor and just really encouraged by the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved it. Love being with you guys.
It's Not About the Money is presented by Provisio Fundraising Solutions. Provisio equips support-based workers with flexible training, practical resources, and one-on-one coaching. Find out more at provisiofundraising.com.